for who but a fool would remain home when heaven was for sale? But as a local priest and pastor, Luther heard all too plainly what was going on and was more than anything concerned for the souls of his flock. He knew that Rome was playing on the ignorance and foolishness of the faithful with this indulgence business. And while this had been going on for many decades, it had never come quite so close to him. So the cynicism of it had never been quite so obvious and awful. It all came even closer to home when some of Luther's own parishioners showed up in the confession booth and beamed with ignorant pride as they showed Father Martinus the precious certificates they had purchased from Tetzel. They clearly expected a much less harsh penance from Luther because, in their minds, they had already paid in advance for the sins they were there to confess. If anyone doubted as much, here was the receipt. They were themselves unsure what the certificate they had purchased was worth, but surely Father Martinus would know and could redeem it for them now, couldn't he? Here was where the theological rubber met the road, because the church could officially say what it liked, but this was the local and particular reality of the whole indulgence business in all its ugliness. Luther saw and heard with his own eyes and ears the effect this was having on simple people trying to live out their Christian lives. They had no idea they were being used by the church for its own distant ends, to build buildings they would never see, and far worse than that, as we shall see. Luther was certainly bothered that money was being sucked away from those who had so little, but it bothered him more that the church, via this practice of indulgences, was actually leading the faithful away from Christ. That was the far greater scandal, and someone must speak out. Luther did not imagine doing so in any grand way. He was a priest with a pulpit, and that was the forum God had given him. So, in February 1517, Luther preached on the subject of indulgences, and then in March he did so again. He was far from the first priest to do so, and he explained to his flock that the papers they purchased meant nothing if they were not genuinely contrite for any sins they had committed. And if they were genuinely contrite, the papers still meant nothing because God forgave their sins anyway. But to be sure, the most diabolical and cynical aspect of indulgences had to do with those that could be purchased to alleviate the suffering of one's relatives in purgatory. Who could allow one's loved ones to suffer the tortures of the damned when one had only to pay some money? What price could one put on that? Tetzel's pitch along these lines was recorded, and it's clear he spared none of his skills to pinch every pfennig possible from his rapt listeners. Listen now, God and St. Peter call you. Consider the salvation of your souls and those of your loved ones departed. You priest, you noble, you merchant, you virgin, you matron, you youth, you old man, enter now into your church, which is the church of St. Peter. Visit the most holy cross erected before you and ever imploring you. Have you considered that you are lashed in a furious tempest amidst the temptations and dangers of the world, and that you do not know whether you can reach the haven not of your mortal body, but of your immortal soul? Consider that all who are contrite and have confessed and made contribution will receive complete remission of all their sins. Listen to the voices of your dear dead relatives and friends beseeching you and saying, "Pity us, pity us. We are in dire torment, from which you can redeem us for a pittance." Do you not wish to? Open your ears. Hear the father saying to his son, the mother to her daughter, "We bore you, nourished you, brought you up, left you our fortunes, and you are so cruel and hard that now you are not willing for so little to set us free. Will you let us lie here in flames? Will you delay our promised glory? Remember that you are able to release them, for as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Will you not then for a quarter of a florin receive these letters of indulgence, through which you are able to lead a divine and immortal soul into the fatherland of praise? Over the centuries, the church bureaucracy had swelled to become something like a vast corporation or government whose distant leaders were out of touch with its various outposts. It had grown more and more powerful, and the rules and laws of the church had become less and less in tune with anything that would have been recognizable to the first century Christians. So, if Paul or Peter were to stumble upon the church of 1517, he could hardly recognize it as something that had grown out of what he had begun. The practice of selling indulgences, which had started as something consonant with the church's teachings, had by Luther's time slipped the surly bonds of all reasonableness. Thus does the invisible hand of the market, unmoored from virtue, fly troubleward.